Today we're going to be mixing together Arctic Fox, Sterling, and Violet Dream. This is actually a voted on mix by you guys as well. So first thing you might notice is that my swatches are labeled 1 through 12. I do quickly just want to remind everyone that that is not synonymous with hair levels. Since I do different video clips and pictures and such throughout the video, the numbers just help us keep track of each swatch. Also, my swatches are not virgin hair, which means they've been chemically colored, treated, or bleached at some point in their existences. 1 is green, 2 is gray, 3 is a mid-tone natural red, 4 is a soft black, and then 4 to 11 is a range that goes to platinum blonde, and then 12 is like a toned version of number 11. So for my mix videos, I like to do at least 2 different ratios of our mix so we can kind of see the range that we can get. I try to do the darker mix on top and the lighter version on the bottom if possible. I don't know if there's going to be a dark versus light with this one, so I'm going to actually start with the equal parts on top. So that'll be 1 part of the Sterling and 1 part of the Violet Dream. And I will say when I swatched this mix, I didn't see a huge difference from the Violet Dream by itself. But I know a lot of people do like to see what an equal parts looks like, so we're going to do that today. And honestly, there's a good chance that it takes different on the swatch versus when you just swatch it on paper towel or whatever.
Baby, you got me going oh so crazy. You got me in my mind, I've been thinking so lately. Broke down, I've done it all before. Words are said, but they left right through the door. Like a storm that's under the sun. I'm unknown to the one I love. Play it out, baby girl, I'm no liar. No doubt, baby, you got me wired. Thought I had it all figured out. 1 foot forward as I.
The second mix is going to be a 4-to-1 ratio. So that's going to be 4 parts of the Sterling to 1 part of the Violet Dream. And I do just want to remind everyone that everyone's hair is different, which means everyone's hair will take color differently. Plus, different screens and monitors can make colors look different. So please just use my video as a reference for how this could possibly turn out for you.
Love bites and breaks. Things I can't bring myself to say. Getting caught up in your mistakes. It wasn't how you planned it now.
I'm going to let this sit for about 2 hours. I will then rinse it out, and when they are dry, I will meet you back here. All right, I do want to give a quick reminder. Again, my swatches are not virgin hair. Virgin hair tends to be less porous, which means it may struggle to take color and hold on to it. So even if it does take, it could rinse out quickly. And that can be especially true the darker your hair is. So even though some of my swatches took on the slightly darker ones, doesn't always necessarily mean it will on your hair. So doing a strand test is always recommended. I'm really happy to see though that this turned out the way that it did. Like I said, when I did the equal parts, I had basically swatched Violet Dream by itself on a paper towel, and then I swatched the mix on a paper towel next to it, and there was a difference, but it didn't seem that wildly different. So I was a little concerned about doing equal parts, but I know like I always get requests to do equal parts, so I wasn't sure, but it definitely does not look like Violet Dream. It definitely took a little bit better. I'm assuming the Sterling absorbed into the hair quite nicely. So number 1 was the green swatch. I would say if the goal is is to cover green. The equal parts is probably slightly better. I do see a little bit of green coming through on the bottom swatch. Overall, the colors turned out quite dark and quite muted. I mean, silver is already a sort of like muted color as is, but the purpley pinky color over the green just made it even more muted. So there is like a touch of color coming through, but it's very subtle. 2 was the gray swatch. Now usually the gray swatch will be the most cool tone, and while it is more cool tone I think than the lighter swatches, it's not wildly different. If I'm looking at like 11 and 12, for example, I would say it's in between 11 and 12. 12 is darker than 11 and maybe a touch more purpley, leaning into the coolness a tiny bit, but again, it's really similar to the lighter swatches. 3 was the natural red. Unfortunately, I don't see a huge difference. I mean, there's definitely a difference from before. I think because there was so much warmth in the natural red beforehand, that kind of takes over. So I see some of the pinky tones sticking to the red from the Violet Dream, and adding the sterling in might give you a different result, because I know if you put the Violet Dream over the natural red, you get a much more purpley result. So if you're looking for something that's not quite as purple, but you still get a little bit of color added to the natural red, this could be a good mix. But you might also just be okay with diluting the Violet Dream. I would say the top half is a little bit darker, and I see a little bit more of a difference on the top than I do on the bottom, but they both did hold on to some of those pinky tones from the Violet Dream. 4 was the soft black. I don't see a difference on that one. 5 was the dark brown, and it is a very minimal difference. I think there's a slight undertone change where it's slightly more pinky than it was before, but the 5 was already so dark that it's really not huge. And on darker swatches like this, I mean, I guess it depends on the result you're looking for, but if you really want to change the undertone of a color, I'd recommend doing colors that are not as muted. So any gray is going to make it harder to see color on the hair. So again, Violet Dream by itself would probably give you a better undertone difference versus adding in the sterling. But of course, it's preference, and hopefully you'll be able to see at least the slight difference in the after clips that we do after this point in the video. 6 is kind of similar. It's not as dark as 5, so I do see more undertone shift than I did on 5, but it still overall looks pretty brown. Since the top half of the swatches have more Violet Dream in them than sterling, I see more of that coming through on the top than I do on the bottom. And similar to 3, it's kind of just slightly more pinky in undertone, but again, still brown. I'd say 7 is where you actually start to see more color actually like coming through. 7 and 8, I still see a lot of brown, especially 7, but it's at the 7 that I start to see more pink than I do brown, if that makes sense. I think the natural undertone makes the color overall look a little bit more natural, so it almost looks like a pink brown, but you don't necessarily have to be in like direct lighting to see the pink, if that makes sense. Again, the top half for 7 and 8 is going to be more pigmented in the color since there's more sterling at the bottom. The bottom kind of on both 7 and 8 have just like a more like light dusting of color. So it's a little bit more muted, but I still see brown. So I guess, how would you word that? Like a muted pinky brown? The lightest swatch was 11. It does concern me a little bit that maybe the company I'm buying some of these from are starting to use less natural hair because of how different the platinum blonde looks compared to the rest. So on your hair, it could turn out a little bit darker, probably a little bit lighter than 10, if my 11 swatch is not as much human hair as they say. But regardless, I'd say the 11 is the most pigmented, I guess you could say. 9 and 10, definitely more purple than the other darker swatches, but because of the natural tone of the swatches beforehand, I'm still seeing a little bit of that where it's not purely saturated color, whereas you see pretty much like purely saturated color on the 11 swatch, with 9 being a little bit darker than 10, but just barely. And honestly, I feel like the 9 and 10 on the top don't look too different. The 10 might be slightly more purple, just a hair. I think the bottom half of the swatches is where I see more of a difference. I think the 9 was struggling a little bit, not actually struggling, but like the 10 looks like a more smooth, consistent color with the muted tone of the sterling being mixed in, whereas I don't see as much of that grayness on the 9. I see more of the natural like dark blonde coming through instead with that pink. And then, like I said, the 12 being the toned swatch of number 11, it's not quite gray, but it's not quite as yellow as the 11 was. So it's darker than 11, a little little bit more purpley than 11, but still more pink than number 2 was on both the top and the bottom. And I would say both the top and the bottom took pretty well on the swatch. I personally really like this mix. I'm the kind of person who loves muted colors a lot, so especially the diluted section I find to be so pretty. Some people may categorize this as like a mauve. The Violet Dream has a lot of pink in it. It's almost like a magenta, but not quite. It's still a little too purple to be a magenta, but very close to that line. A lot of people think purpley pinks are mauves, and me personally, I think it's mauve when you start adding a tiny bit of dustiness to it. So to some, this may be a mauve. So first comparison I want to look at is actually Violet Dream, so we can see what it looked like beforehand. So this is going to be Arctic Fox in Violet Dream compared to number 12, 11, 10, and number 9. Sorry if you can hear the phone ringing in the background, by the way. All right, so you see now, right? Like, it's a very big difference. Adding the sterling in really, really cools down the Violet Dream. And personally, I do see a lot of purple in Violet Dream on its own, but next to the mix, it literally does look like a straight up pink or magenta. I really love when the mixes turn out different from the like original color. So I'm really happy with this mix. And you know, if you were hoping to make Violet Dream a little dustier and a little bit cooler, adding some sterling really might do it for you. I will remind everyone though, again, that usually colors that are dusty will have a slightly harder time taking to your hair, especially if it's not porous. So if you have hair that struggles to take color, going for something that's more saturated will probably give you a better result, but you could probably mute the Violet Dream with even less sterling than I have in my top mix if you want it to be a little less pinky. So after seeing how this looked dried, the very first thing that I thought of was Lunar Tides in the color Smoky Mauve, which is partly why I was saying that I think this would be considered a mauve. So let's compare those. This is comparable to number 12, 11, 10, and comparable to number 9. All right. Back onto the mauve subject, I will say I feel like it's one of those colors that everyone has a slightly different interpretation for what it looks like. My personal interpretation for mauve is actually just like the Smoky Mauve. I always view mauve as being like that, so I think seeing it next to the mixture, you can see just how much more pink is in the Smoky Mauve that you actually lose with the sterling mixed in, because as we saw before, there was quite a bit of pink in the Violet Dream beforehand. Lunar Tides does have one called Smoky Purple as well. I haven't done that one yet, so I'm not sure if it would be similar or not, but I will keep that in mind when I do Smoky Purple. If it looks similar, I'll probably post something on my Patreon. While I personally really like the Lunar Tides Smoky Mauve, I think it's probably one of those colors that's better for lighter hair. You can see just on number 9, like there is a difference for the Smoky Mauve, but the Violet Dream mix is a lot more pigmented and probably a little bit better for darker hair or even like just dark blonde hair. I really did not realize just how purple this mix was until I'm comparing this now, but I think that's good considering it's called Violet Dream. It makes sense that it would turn out very purpley. The Smoky Mauve is very smoky though, so I'm gonna just put it down at the bottom so you can see. I think that actually looks a little bit more similar, but again, the Smoky Mauve does have a little bit more pink in it, but they are both quite dusty. If I think of any other comparisons that might be more similar, I will post those on my Patreon and I will link them here, so you can always look in the comments and see if I posted anything. But now I would like to look at the before and after clips. Those, as well as everything past this point in the video, is all going to be done in natural lighting.
Baby, you got me going oh so crazy. You got me in my mind, I've been thinking so lately. Broke down, I've done it all before.
I hope my video helped. If you have a request, I do have a link below to a Google form you can fill out. Just remember, I only do brands that do not test on animals. Thank you so very, very much to my patrons, and thank you for watching, and I hope to see you in my next video.